Coronary Heart Disease and Diet by Natalie, Lindsay, Molly, Megan, Victoria, and Katie. Here is the classic diet heart hypothesis that states a high intake of saturated fat and dietary cholesterol increases the risk of coronary heart disease. Diet has been strongly related to blood cholesterol levels for many years. When studying this relationship, it is best to use randomized, double-blind studies to achieve best results. Agreeing with the classic diet heart hypothesis, higher intake of saturated fat and cholesterol do increase total blood cholesterol along with the lower polyunsaturated fat intake. One important aspect to know is that making any specific changes to diet in order to have an effect on total cholesterol may not decrease level, but may increase or even have no effect. It has been shown that making specific changes to the individual cholesterol components is a more effective way to change total serum cholesterol levels. Many believe substituting carbohydrates may help to decrease blood cholesterols, but it has been found that when monounsaturated fats are consumed as the main energy source in a diet, it has a more positive effect on the blood cholesterol. Polyunsaturated fats do have a positive effect in conjunction with other dietary changes, however. Recent studies show a fairly weak effect, which could be attributed to a higher baseline polyunsaturated fat intake in our diet as compared with diets in the 1950s, when many studies were showing a stronger effect on total cholesterol. MRFIT study in 1982 is one of the largest U.S. studies in relationship between blood cholesterol and CHD risk. It was based on total cholesterol as singular factor, which resulted in a large margin of error or dilution of the true relationship. As mentioned previously, it has been found that using the LDL and HDL lipid fractions are much more powerful to determine CHD risk than total cholesterol alone. Lower HDL levels have more strongly related to higher risk than higher levels of LDL. However, studies have shown that lowering LDL and increasing HDL are both important in reducing CHD risk. Many studies with different assumptions have shown that relative risk of CHD when looking at the saturated fat content in the diet may or may not have an effect on the blood lipid ratios. Therefore, it is not proven that substituting carbohydrates for saturated fat as energy would reduce the risk. Other factors like obesity, estrogen, alcohol, smoking, medications, and physical activity also can have a strong effect on HDL levels, which can also either reduce or increase CHD risk along with dietary elements. Dietary intake does still remain a strong factor in risk of CHD, as it has been shown that poorer countries with lower CHD risk and different eating patterns have lower HDL levels and total cholesterol to HDL ratios. There is an increased CHD risk of more than 1.5 times when LDL is higher than 160 and LDL is less than 130. Studies show that a higher number of particles is directly associated with increased CHD risk. There are case control studies that have been conducted, but they are limited by recall and selection biases. Studies indicate that specific types of fat have varying impacts on risk of CHD. Studies are available that use biomarkers. The ones that exist examine fatty acid intake and can provide information that is often missed on dietary intake questionnaires. For trials of dietary fat modification, there are two main methods: replace saturated fat with polyunsaturated fat and replace saturated fat with carbohydrates. Animal studies are used in place of human studies, and most studies observe replacing saturated fat with polyunsaturated fat reduces the incidence of CHD. The diet heart hypothesis remains unproven by the most rigorous scientific standards. In terms of oxidative considerations, confounding factors like cigarette smoking or a diet lacking of antioxidants increases oxidation of LDL, which can influence risk of CHD. Total energy balance and genetic variation can lead to inadequacies in some studies. The quality of carbohydrates must be taken in consideration, and a broader, more general diet heart hypothesis is potentially needed. The economic loss from CHD and related diseases are an estimated $254 billion. Studies have shown an improvement in quality of diet, however, over the past 30 years due to an increase in whole grains and a decrease in saturated fats and trans fat. Education has led to awareness in some populations. Public schools, limiting availability of foods high in added sugars through sales has been put in place, and limiting advertising and marketing on foods that are high in calorie and low in nutrients. Menu labeling has also increased awareness of risk reduction behaviors. Dietary intake of 10% trans fatty acid raises LDL cholesterol in the same manner as saturated fat and decreases HDL cholesterol. These results confirmed the link between trans fatty acid intake and increased CHD risk. Additional metabolic studies confirm these results, which lead to a ban on the use of partially hydrogenated fats in Denmark, Brazil, Chile, and the US. On June 16, 2015, the FDA issued a final overhaul of partially hydrogenated oils, which identified as not generally recognized as safe. Food companies were given 3 years to reformulate their products, but recently received an extension. The new compliance date on January 1st is January 1st, 2020. However, some products still contain traces of trans fat. Nutrition labels can claim 0 grams of trans fat as long as the product contains less than 0.5 grams per serving. Vitamin E inhibits oxidative modification of LDL cholesterol and ultimately the accumulation of cholesterol in the arterial wall. The antioxidant hypothesis states that antioxidant function of nutrients like vitamin E protect against CHD. This research has influenced nutrition guidelines within the USDA. Vitamin E is an example of monosaturated and polyunsaturated fat. The USDA's health facts encourage replacing saturated fat with these vitamin E containing fats to lower LDL cholesterol. The USDA recommends these dietary changes to decrease the risk of CHD. Thanks for listening.